Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. There has been a lot of noise today. There has been helicopters helicoptering, neighbours vacuuming, whatever. So my apologies for the usual noise. Actually, it's not the usual. This is particularly bad levels of noise, but moving on. The purpose of this video is to talk to you about the books which I read while I was studying creative writing at university. Now you may be thinking, shouldn't she have studied science at university? Yes, I did. I did a 4-year Bachelor of Science and then a 2-year Masters of Science. But this would have meant 6 years of consistent non-stop study, no holidays, no getting experiences, no relaxation, no joy. Oh god, just memorize these facts. Tell me about this protein. So, I decided to prevent burnout. I wanted to take a minimum 6, preferably 12-month gap between these 2 degrees. And I preferably wanted to go somewhere. Like, I wanted to go to Canada for 6 months or something. Like, go and do adventure-y things whilst also earning some money and having a break, etc. between these 2 degrees. That plan did not work at all. Like, I looked at something like 2,500 to 3,000 jobs for scientists available anywhere in the world, and I was qualified with my bachelor's for less than 10 of them. And even then, for those jobs where a bachelor's was sufficient, you also had to be fluent in Spanish, or a registered teacher, or a diver, or experienced at welding underwater. Like, no. So I was a little bit screwed. I was determined to take a break though, because I just couldn't imagine that I would get through 6 years of non-stop study without getting burned out. So what I did was enroll in a graduate certificate in writing studies. Now this is a course which allows you to transition from one discipline to another without having to go back to square one. So in my case, this would have been do a full bachelor's in science, then do a graduate certificate in writing studies, and then I could have gone on to graduate study in English, or writing studies specifically, without having to go back and get another bachelor's. So that, in terms of the paperwork, was the point, but secretly, the point was just a holiday, because I was really tired, and I spent a semester reading books and writing poetry, and it was really joyous, and I just quietly and politely didn't point out to my classmates who were freaking out about how hard literary theory was that I had no background and was just doing it for a holiday. But anyway, the point is, I spent a semester and a bit. I did actually do 2 electives in creative writing, one in my bachelor's time and one during my master's period, but basically 1 semester and a bit of reading books at this university, and it was glorious. So I thought I would share them with you. I've divided the books into 2 basic categories. The first one's going to be the books that I had to read for creative writing courses, and then the second group is going to be the everything else, the books that I had to read for more literary analysis type courses. So starting off with books that I had to read for creative non-fiction. First is Hilary Mantel's Giving Up the Ghost. This is about her experience of having endometriosis, starting from when she was extremely young, pre-diagnosis, through to her, well, current at the time of writing, self as an adult, and having to go through the process of giving up the ghost of the life she thought she might lead, but she isn't able to have because of what is happening with her body. For that course I also had to read Rick Moody's Black Veil, which I didn't read, and there was actually another book which I started and eventually unhauled because I hated it so much, and I've completely deleted everything about it from my head because I just didn't like it. So apparently for me, memoir is a bit hit and miss. I do read memoir, like I have a whole section on it, but it's not always super fun for me. Anyway, the rest of the books are all from fiction writing courses, which were much more my jam. Next up we have The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is a book that I would class as having an unusual narrator, in that the narrator is autistic, or at least something similar. I don't think we're ever given an explicit diagnosis, but you kind of come to understand that it's probably autism. What's interesting about this is that it has him doing a whole bunch of things which for most people don't seem very logical, and it's very, like, you know, abnormal, but it's presented in a way that makes it really easy to empathize with. It's like holy crap, actually that is a really stressful experience, and I can understand why, yes, you would just sit there and rock back and forth and moan, even though that's not how you personally would handle that situation. So I actually think it's a really good book for like creating a bit of understanding and empathy for a perspective that you might not personally have or like be familiar with. Another book with a slightly unusual perspective, The Virgin Suicides. This is told from a first person plural perspective, so we. That's quite unusual. I've only read a handful, possibly actually only two that I can think of off the top of my head, books that have that perspective. This is the first book I read it in, and I really, really enjoyed it, even though the actual story itself was a little bit weird to me. But the narrative style totally paid off. Gonna run out of display room. Next up is Fight Club. This is so much more graphic than the movie. Like, in the movie, like, he's brushing his teeth and he pulls one of his own teeth out and drops it down the sink. We see him with like stitches and black eyes. In this, he has, and I quote, a butthole in his cheek. It doesn't heal. It's there for the whole book. It keeps coming up. And for those of you who've seen the movie, Marla Singer is an active member of Project Mayhem in this. Acid scar on her hand and all. Also in this, the plot twist isn't, like, admittedly I had seen the movie before I read the book, but I think it's extremely clear what's going on right from the get-go. But all of the kind of picturesque, I don't know if it's quite the word that I want, but the interesting voiceover stuff that they have in the movie is taken direct from the book. So it's an interesting, intense kind of a narrative. I think in terms of what story you're going to enjoy more, I think the movie's both an easier experience and a better story, and like they kind of tied it up a little bit. I think actually I hear rumour that the author of this has actually commented something to that effect, like the movie improved upon the book. But this is still kind of worth the read in that it's super unusual. I haven't read many other books that are this kind of violent and visceral without a rape scene, I guess. Where am I going to put you? I don't know. Another kind of intense read, we have The Road. Again, this might be a book that you've heard of. It's fairly famous. It is a post-apocalyptic journey with a father and son, characters who never have stated names throughout the book, and they are travelling through this very wasteland kind of place with cannibalism a constant threat, and yep, this is why I don't write book reviews. And last up for the books that I had to read for the creative writing courses was As I Lay Dying. What I appreciate about this book from a creative writing perspective is that at the time I read this, I was spending a lot of time on Tumblr and I was seeing a lot of writers asking questions about word counts and chapter length specifically. Like, how long should a chapter be? And the answer There is an answer for this. Are you listening? The answer is however the fuck long you decide. You do not have to have a specific number of words per chapter. Don't worry about it. Write the number of words that convey what you want. That's it. This book exemplifies this beautifully. There is a, I guess, chapter. This book doesn't have numbered chapters. It has just the name of the prospective character and then the next prospective character. So you can see 2 chapters on 2 pages. There is a chapter in here, and I can quote it exactly. The entirety of the chapter is, "My mother is a fish." That's it. And that is a chapter within the context of this book, which doesn't have numbered chapters. This is an excellent way of seeing how to break up your story into little chunks without worrying about the size of those chunks. I think that's probably, sorry, I'm just like not looking at the camera and just randomly flicking through it, I don't know why. I think this is probably my main takeaway from this. It is a book in which there are kind of quiet reveals. The reader learns about motivations and what characters are doing without it being like a big drama in between the individual characters. Each character is kind of processing and mourning their own things in their own way, and that's really interesting. But as someone wanting to learn how to write a book and worrying about what constitutes a chapter, read this and reassess your question. Don't worry about it. Anyway, I'm going to move on now. I didn't realise I had a rant on that topic. My apologies. Moving on to the books that I had to read for the not creative writing courses. I did do a course on literary theory. For that one we didn't actually read a book, we just dissected a single poem, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. It's just a poem. There is no book for that one. Moving on to the reading I had to do for Victorian literature. Now, Victorian literature is the name of the course, but you'll see in a minute that that might not be the most accurate name for the course. First we had to read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Okay, fair enough, Victorian fiction. Very wordy. A lot of my classmates felt that it was too technical. As a scientist I thought it was fine, but barely. Very technical. Then we had The Time Machine. I was weirded out by the relationship of the main character and like his little friend that he makes in the future who's putting things in his pockets. Like, it was always sort of vaguely creepy. But nothing came of that, so we'll just pretend it's fine and move on. Alright. Okay, so Victorian literature. Fine. Then we had to read Morlock Nights, which was published in the 1980s and is not a good book. Like, I really don't recommend this book. But you'll see in a minute why we had to read it and why it was appropriate for us to have to read it. Having started off with these two, I've run out of shelf. We then had to read The Strange Affair of Spring-Heeled Jack, which is steampunk. And then we had to read Stormdancer, which I have recently unhauled, but is steampunk. And then Soulless, which is also steampunk. So, what this course actually was a little bit of Victorian literature, and then a book which is kind of written to be the sequel to The Time Machine, but written in the 1980s, and then contemporary steampunk. So what this course actually was looking at steampunk as the descendant of the scientific romances of the Victorian period. So calling it Victorian literature seemed a little bit odd, but you know, I got to read some cool books. So yeah, this we read because this is technically like the first steampunk book. So this is like the missing link between these books and these ones. And our last book isn't from a course that I personally took, but it was a required text for one of the other courses within the English department that I heard really good things about and eventually decided to go and pick up, and that is Lighter Than My Shadow. This is a graphic memoir recounting a person's experience of developing an eating disorder, so trigger warnings for anorexia, bulimia and sexual assault. It deals with things pretty, I was going to say graphically, but it's a graphic novel. That seems like a weird statement. It deals with things in a way that I think at times could make you feel a bit squeamish. There is a series of drawings at one point where her stomach becomes a gaping mouth, and it's when she is experiencing binge eating. And then the other thing that's quite interesting about the art in this is that she has this kind of squiggly black cloud that is usually there. I think it's not always, but usually it's there, and its size changes depending on her own mental state, so it's kind of a reflection of like the darkness within kind of thing. And there's a couple of spreads where it like completely engulfs the page and that kind of thing. Like, it's really well done. There's some really good visual storytelling involved, but yes, some quite serious trigger warnings. However, that being said, I was recommended this book by a person who has anorexia and bulimia. They read this book in that course and was like, oh my god, it's the best book I've ever read. So trigger warnings with it, well, you might actually still like it, kind of a caveat. It makes you understand the eating disorder in a different way. I think we often see anorexia and bulimia being portrayed as, you know, person thinks they're fat, thinks this is the way to become thin. That's not how her eating disorder starts, and frankly I don't think it's how it starts for a lot of people. It's more about obtaining control, and that is expressed really well in this text, and I suspect that's kind of why people who have eating disorders recommend this book. So that's everything that I read whilst briefly studying creative writing at university. Do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you think of them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!